Sometimes I have a mohawk, but don't worry, I have a little bit of mohawk blood in me. Yeah, cool story. Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. But today I'm going to talk about my interactions with the Native American church. But to introduce that story, we need to start with my relationship with my mom. I was always really close with her growing up. She was really loving to everybody, so it was easy to love her back. As I said before, she had really bad health my whole life, but when I got back from my mission, her health was declining a lot. She had a stroke before my mission, which was interesting because it affected the part of her brain that feels spiritual things. And she was always a very spiritual person, but after that stroke, she had a hard time feeling any kind of emotions about church stuff or anything really, which is interesting that there's a part of our brain that affects spirituality. There have been some studies on that, something called like the God helmet or something. Anyway, she had another major stroke after my mission, and this one affected the part of her brain that dealt with speech. So she couldn't speak. She thought she was speaking, but she was just mumbling. And my dad and other people are like, "I'm sorry, honey, I can't understand you." And I could imagine how that felt. So even though I didn't understand her, I was like, "Yeah, I get it, Mom, of course, right." And her neurons grew and found another path, and her speech came back, which was great. And she said, I didn't understand why nobody could understand me except for Timmy. So my mom was always fearful that she would die before her kids fully grew up. It was a big fear she had. Her grandma, her dad's mom, died young when he was really little. He ended up being raised by his stepdad, and she really didn't want to leave young kids in this life. And it was a big fear of hers, but she got a patriarchal blessing from a Mormon patriarch, and it said that she would live to raise all of her kids to maturity. And that was really comforting for her. And it came true too. I was the youngest, the last to move out. I had recently gotten married, and we had our first kid. When she was only 4 months old, we went to visit my parents, and we talked for a while, and we had to go, so I gave my mom a hug. I was holding the baby, we were heading out, and she looked at me. She didn't look good, and she said, "I'm not doing well." And I said, "I know. I'm sorry." And we went home. It had been this way for a long time, but I didn't realize that those would be my last words with her. She had another major stroke and heart attack just after that, and she passed. At her funeral, we sang the church hymn that she always said she wanted sung at her funeral, "Master, the Tempest is Raging." I got up and said a few words about what an amazing, loving person she was. I took her passing a lot better than I thought I would. I thought I'd be a mess, but because of the spiritual teachings that I was raised with and my belief in an afterlife, I was able to cope with it, and those beliefs really helped me deal with her passing. I thought, life is short, we all die, I'll see her again soon. She used to occasionally joke that after she passed, she would come and haunt us. And after she passed, I really wanted to have some kind of a vision, have her come talk to me in a dream or something, have some kind of contact. I wanted to know what she was doing on the other side. I read a couple of books from my parents' library about LDS members that had near-death experiences, and I was searching through everything I could find that the church taught about the afterlife. I was also researching a lot about what other ancient cultures taught and how they felt about the afterlife. And I found that a lot of them ceremonially used entheogens to part the veil and see relatives on the other side. Entheogens is another word for psychoactive compounds. So the Druids would take psilocybin or magic mushrooms in their ceremonies. Some Native American tribes would take peyote in ceremonies so that they could talk with the ancestors. And since I had contact with the Native American church, I was looking into that as an option to maybe try and contact my mother. I thought there might be something to it, and it was worth a try. So I researched a bunch about doses and how it'll affect you, how long it lasts. The Native American church uses peyote as a sacrament, so they can legally distribute it to the congregation. So I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing anything illegal. It's worth noting that I never did any drugs growing up before this happened. I wouldn't even drink caffeinated beverages, but I was open to drinking this peyote tea if it would help me have a spiritual experience and possibly contact my mom. So I go to the sweat lodge, and before entering, we had a pass the pipe ceremony. It had tobacco, and I didn't smoke, so I just passed the pipe on. But then they brought out the medicine, which is peyote, these crushed buttons from a cactus, and I read that 2 spoonfuls would be plenty for your first time to have a reaction, but I wanted to make sure it really worked, so as they passed it around, I put 4 heaping spoonfuls in my cup, drank it down, and then we were talking in the circle for a while. It had been like 25 minutes, and I asked the lady, should something be happening? She's like, yeah, you should be feeling something about now. And I was like, I don't feel anything. She's like, well, go with what your body tells you. You can have more if you want. And I was like, okay. So I took 4 more heaping spoonfuls and drank it down. It's kind of classic, stupid first time. And then we went outside to where the sweat lodge is, and they smudged each of us with sage before we went in to cleanse us or whatever, and then we crawled into the sweat lodge. It's really hot, and that first dose started kicking in, and I just felt like nauseous, uncomfortable. I could hear this banging noise, like a drum, just doof, 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 and it was pretty intense in my head. Most of the experience was audio, not visual, but I felt super uncomfortable, so I was like, I gotta get out. So I went out, and I was laying there just looking up at the sky, and I was seeing like blue and red dots in the sky, and I was like, I gotta get this stuff out of me. So I was like, oh, but I couldn't throw up. Doesn't work for me. But I remembered that I had asked the lady if I could drive after, and she said, oh yeah, that's fine. And I was like, I'm just gonna drive home and be with my wife and ride this out for the next 18 hours. So I get in the car, I start driving, and I hear like lawnmowers and stuff, but they're like slow motion and low, like and I was like, oh, what's happening? But when I said that, like, my voice was also slowed down, so it was like, what's happening? And I was like, what? And I was driving down the road, and then all of a sudden, like, I lost my bearings. It just looked like the road went forever, and I was like, uh-oh, I gotta pull over. This is dangerous. So I pulled into a parking lot, and I was like, dang, I guess I'm gonna sit here for 18 hours, because that's what I read. I was in an Applebee's parking lot in Utah, just sitting there. Time got weird. It seemed like I just watched the sun just go down like that, like in a few seconds. I was like, whoa, that was weird. I got really paranoid. People looked in the windows at me and I was like, don't look at me. Then I was like, oh no, someone's gonna like call the cops and I'm gonna have to talk to the cops and try and act normal. And I was like, all right, let's practice. Everything's fine, officer. And I hear it, everything's fine, officer. And I was like, this isn't good. It's not gonna work. I was kind of freaking out and everything started to bother me in the physical world. I was like, dude, I gotta calm down. Like, look out at the mountains. They're pretty. See the beauty. And I was like, ugh, I hate the mountains. And then I was like, think of something else you like. And everything was bothering me. The only things that kind of calmed me down, I kept looking in the rearview mirror to see myself, look in my eyes, and I was like, you're here, you're okay. But I would say, I love my wife, and that would calm me down. And I would say, God is good, and that would calm me down. But everything else is just freaking me out. And then the second dose kicked in, and it felt like thousands of little spiders just crawling up my brain. And I was like, whoa, this is a weird sensation. And then I blanked out. I wasn't aware of what was going on around me. I couldn't see anything. And kind of like a near-death experience, I was in this white place, just whiteness. It didn't feel awesome. It felt like a boring white place where everything was just white. And then I heard this voice, this deep, stereotypical God voice that said, are you ready to come here and be a part of this? And I thought, heck no, I don't want to be here. I've got a wife and kids and I got a life to live. I don't want to be here in the nothing. And then stuff started to wear off and I was aware of where I was again. It was dark and I was like, man, I gotta get home. But I still don't feel comfortable driving. And then I saw that the restaurant was closing and there wasn't going to be anyone around to ask for help. And I was like, dang it, I gotta go talk to someone. And I went up to this guy and I was like, hey, can I borrow your phone? And his wife was like, no, don't let him borrow it. I must have looked crazy. But he's like, yeah, of course, here you go. And I called for a ride, got home, and my poor wife had to deal with me all night, being like, oh. Well, I didn't see my mom. No vision like that. Pretty disappointing. I kind of felt like my brain was just fried for a few hours. I was poisoned. The people from the sweat were surprised that I didn't purge, because it's really normal for people to throw up. They thought it was a sign that I was stubborn. I was like, I probably get that from my mom. One educational takeaway that I got from the experience was that even though my brain was not working right, stuff was scrambled, part of me was completely conscious and thinking the thoughts that I normally think. And I had always wondered, what is my spirit and what is just my physical brain? Like, how do you differentiate between the two? And this experience did that. My physical body, my brain, weren't working right, but my spirit or mind was still there, still the same. And that helped me differentiate between the two, so that was kind of cool. So it was a learning experience. I was learning a lot of things. Something around this time, maybe earlier, I was fasting to better know God. And that's when I came across the Adam God theory. I'll talk about that next.